Take the distress out of dining. Now introducing a revolutionary new way to enjoy your favorite meals alone. With the cutting-edge technology of the TV dinner prepackaged meal, there's absolutely no need for you to go to the market, cook meals, or even sit at the dinner table. Indeed, everything you need for maximum nutrition and fortification can be found within the walls of this plastic tray. As electromagnetic radiation heats your meal, think about all of the human interactions that you were spared from, all of the time that you're saving. Speaking of time, it's dinner time. This is the future. This is the evolution of the human experience. This is what you've always wanted. All you've ever...
What is the expert level of a life less lonely? Now, when I think about levels, I think about video games. Anyone else? I remember growing up, my brother Alex and I, we would wake up super early every Saturday. We'd race down the stairs to the basement, jump over the back of the couch so we could play Nintendo for as long as possible before our parents figured it out and stopped us. And, you know, we were pumped. You know, you'd grab that cartridge and jam it in the console. You're good to go. Good to game. You know, and when we were going road trips, we would get to play our Game Boys. Now, this was a state-of-the-art brick of a device. You know, it was all in black and white, and the screen was not lighted, so you literally, like, you had to attach a physical light to the front of it to see in the dark. But it was glorious. Anybody else, you know, ever been a fan of a certain video game or computer game, play a part in your journey? Yeah, I still play from time to time, every once in a while, even now, because I love the challenge of being able to play a level and see if I can beat it and get on to the next level and the new obstacles that might be in my path. That's how it is with a lot of games, right? They get progressively more difficult. And, you know, sometimes you get stuck on a level, you know, and maybe there's a spot where you can't make it past because you keep falling in the lava, or you can't defeat a certain boss or figure out the puzzle. And so you just get stuck, and you know, the failures add up. I can remember with Mario Brothers, the failure music is just burned into my brain permanently. There we go. There he goes. Oh, can't forget that. Right? But we know to get to the next level is going to take some growth, and new skills and new tactics. It's the same with video games, but it's also the same in life. In whatever phase we are in, we know that to get to the next phase of life, it's going to involve adding new skills, new tactics, new growth in some way to our journey, because life is maturing and growing. That's just a part of things, right? We like the feeling of comfort of whatever phase that we're currently in, but we know it's not good for us to stay there for too long and to stagnate. We know it's good for us to aim for the next goal, the next phase of life. And we don't want to be constantly dissatisfied with where we're at in life, right? I mean, that doesn't do either. But we know that it's far sweeter if we can win at a higher level, if we can hit the next milestone. Yes. That was the greatest sound when you were playing this game, right? The victory. Don't forget about the fireworks. But it doesn't matter if it takes a whole lot of growth to get there. It is worth it, right? We've been exploring loneliness in this series, A Life Less Lonely, and how we all experience it, and how actually our pursuit of a life less lonely is intertwined with our faith journey. And that, you know, a lack of faith is not necessarily correlated to you know, loneliness. If you're not faithful enough, you'll be lonely. There's some very faithful people that can feel lonely still. But what we know is that God's heart for us is to experience a new relational wholeness as we follow after him. And the major growth barriers that he has for us in our faith journey are often the same barriers that stand in front of us on our path to the expert level of a life less lonely. In fact, today we're going to talk about 3 barriers that stand in the way of the expert level of a life less lonely. And, I don't know where you're at in your journey, what phase you're in, but it's very possible you could be stuck at one of the 3 barriers, and it could be keeping you from the full richness and wholeness that God has in store for you in relationship and in connection. So this is an important topic. Let's dig into this, okay? There is a pastor named Jim Putman, and he's written a lot of books, and he encouraged us to think about spiritual development in terms with the analogy of human development. And so he has this circle he created where he says, think about spiritual development this way, that there's spiritual infancy where we're just coming to know the faith, where it's very fresh and new. There's childhood where we're learning the ropes of the faith. There's young adulthood where we're putting it into action, and parenthood where we're developing wisdom in the faith. And he says, think about it this way and think about where you might be. And it's okay to be at any part in this 4-phase spiritual journey. God loves us the same no matter which phase we may or may not be in. And, we can't just rush things. Growth takes time, and we're all somewhere on the growth spectrum. But between each phase of the circle, in this transition period, is a barrier. There is something that must be crossed, a wall that must be climbed, an obstacle that has to be breached in order to get from infant to child, or child to young adult, or young adult to parent. There's an obstacle that we can't go around, you can't ignore, it must be dealt with. And with these obstacles, we know that it's so important for us on this expert level, first and foremost, to recognize them, but also to set the appropriate aim for where we're currently at in our journey. And so as we work our way through the circle today, think about where you might be. Give thanks to God for all the growth you've done. Like truly, you're awesome. You've grown a lot. And think about where God might be pointing you, aiming you, what the next barrier might be. So we start out in spiritual infancy, and tell me, what do we know about infants? Shout it out. They need a lot of help, okay? What else do we know about infants? All right, they cry a lot, needy. You can tell, parents of an infant, that glazed look in their eyes, right? You just know. They're cute, but yes, they require a lot of help. They are helpless. Infants come into life through no choice of their own, but instead they receive life as a gift. And it's the same way for us in our faith journey, that we receive life as a gift from God. His Holy Spirit does a work in our hearts to bring us to trust in Him. We give thanks to God for that gift of knowing Him. But we also know that faith is something that must be nurtured. That when we come to faith and to know Him, it must be nurtured if we are to move from spiritual infancy to spiritual childhood, just like any infants must be nurtured. And nurture requires love, and love requires connection. Connection is the first barrier that we have to move past on this journey of crossing barriers for greater maturity and a life less lonely. Connection is powerful. Just think about how Jesus reinforces the importance of this with His disciples. I mean, he doesn't just leave them to follow Him. It says that Jesus called His disciples to Him and chose 12 of them who He also designated apostles. And then we have the whole list of names. But Jesus had this whole bunch of disciples that had begun to follow Him, but then He puts definition, He puts structure around it. He brings them together in relationship with Him and one another into a sort of church. Without the intentional act of putting structure around their relationship and connecting them together, their future growth trajectory would have been totally different. The disciples would have been left, likely their interaction with Jesus would have been limited to, hey, I met Jesus, the famous rabbi, one time, and that's pretty cool, right? But because Jesus provides an intentional framework for them to be connected and grow and follow him together, their lives are never the same, right? They get brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers in the faith. They get connected with crowds and whole bunches of people. They are filled with connection in their lives because of Jesus and through him. Now, some of you know here that my title at Pathfinder is Pastor of Weekend Ministry. And no, that doesn't mean that I just work on the weekends only. There's no pastor of weekday ministry on staff. But what it means is that I lead the weekend team, which is comprised of an amazing group that helps put on worship and next generation ministries on the weekend. And we had a retreat over this past week where we got together. And one of the exercises that we did was that we put down the 5 most pivotal moments in our faith journey and shared them with one another. And, that's something you kind of have to think about for a few minutes and process through. And it was actually a great exercise of thinking through all the ways that God had moved in my journey and sharing that, and then learning about a lot of my coworkers and how God has moved in their journey as well. But one thing I noticed, and that's that without fail, every single story that was told, connection was an early catalyst for future growth. You see, for some of us that are worshiping here today, that are in the room, the reason that our faith has stayed stagnant, or the reason that you feel lonely, is because we're trying to believe in Jesus apart from the church, apart from connecting with the people of God. And I think that the author, Brené Brown, she has a great handle on exactly why this doesn't work. She says, we cultivate love when we allow our most vulnerable and powerful selves to be deeply seen and known. And when we honor the spiritual connection that grows from that offering with trust, respect, kindness, and affection. But key here is that we must be seen in order to be known. We must be known in order to be loved. We must be loved in order to have the nurture that we need to grow further. We have to be seen and known in connection with one another in order to get to new paths of growth. Connection, without that, it doesn't work. And that's the church is all about connection. That's what the church is here for, is bringing together imperfect people in pursuit of whole life. The church, it provides regular pathways for people to connect, for us to lower our defenses and be able to be known and loved and grow together. Scripture describes the effect we can have on one another in this way. It says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. And as you think about, maybe a hammer beating a sword, and there's sparks and heat, and it's kind of a violent process. But the point here is that the more we connect with one another, the more refined we become. The sharper and more capable and more full and whole we become, right? And this goes for kids too. That authentic community is really important for kids, primarily as they interact with their parents' friends, with other encouraging adults. For people of all ages, connection is super important for allowing us to be encouraged, challenged, and inspired, but it requires vulnerability. And that can be scary, can't it? It's a lot easier to say, I want to be vulnerable and open. It's harder to do. And for some of us, that gives us anxiety to think about opening up to others and letting them through the exterior. And so we just go like, nope, I'm good. I've managed in life thus far. I'm going to be fine, right? Others of us, on our minds, we know that there's times when we've let our defenses down and we got hurt. We've got the scars of misplaced vulnerability. And so you're like, I don't want to do that again. And because of that, sometimes we get very good, don't we, at being present without truly being seen, without being open and letting people past the exterior to see the real us. And maybe that's you. Maybe you resonate with that. But at the end of the day, if we want a life that's far richer and more full and less lonely, then we need to embrace the connection, to heal and to grow and to find meaningful relationships. And we got to trust Jesus along that vulnerable way. It is connection that moves us from infancy to spiritual childhood. But at a certain point, we also encounter another barrier that we need to begin to shift our focus outward towards service. It is service that is required to move from being a spiritual child to a spiritual young adult. If you don't serve, you will never get there. And Jesus knows this. He engages his disciples in service early on. In Matthew 10, it says, Jesus called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out impure spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. Jesus didn't just have the disciples on the sidelines observing. They weren't just his fans, but instead he engages them in the ministry. You know, he has the disciples baptizing people instead of him and so forth, because Jesus knows the power of service. And in fact, most of what I have learned about service, or about God and growth, I have learned through serving. The church I grew up in, much like Pathfinder, offered a lot of mission trips. And in high school, I remember on one of those mission trips, just a powerful example of what service looks like. My friend Laura she saw something the rest of us didn't. We were putting on a Bible teaching for some kids, and she noticed this little girl who was deaf, and we couldn't communicate very well with her at all. And most of us are just like, that's sad. And not Laura. She went way above and beyond. She went home, took the next year learning sign language, went the next year, searched for that girl, found her, and when she began signing to her, you would not believe the joy, right? And the rest of us, the joy from her face, the rest of us are looking on, we're like, I'm not crying, you're crying. But it was powerful. And it just showed me the heart of Jesus, that Laura would do that. Think about all that work involved to make a difference in the life of one person. That's a powerful example of service, because service is important because we cannot remain solely focused on us and taking and receiving forever. For a time in our journey, that's right. For spiritual childhood, it's right to have people pour into us. But the shift to young adulthood recognizes that at a certain point, it's healthy for us to become a contributor in the work of Jesus. Someone who says, I'm part of this thing, right? And it requires us to think not just about me, but the needs of others. In telling us to serve, Jesus is helping us encounter an inward-outward tension dynamic that we have to wrestle with in order to make the shift and embrace service and push through to spiritual young adulthood. We have to process through this inward-outward thing, because Jesus says a lot of provocative things about being outward focused. He says you got to die to self. He says that you've got to consider the needs of others above your own needs, things like that. And so we imagine that it's something like this, that as Jesus is communicating, we start life very inward focused, and then at a certain point we've got to make that switch and become more outward focused. We got to leave behind thoughts of ourselves and think of others. Think about some of the saints. Saint Francis, who in the 13th century just wandered around in poverty, being kind to people, not caring about his own needs. That's the story that as we think it goes. And you can get a lot done when you're not focused on yourself and you're focused on the needs of others. You can do a lot of good. But we also know, right, that some of the most unhealthy people in our lives are the ones who don't recognize that they have needs for self-care, right? And we kind of go, okay, if I'm not focusing on my needs and I'm ignoring my humanity, that's not good either. That eventually can lead to disaster. It can lead us to hurt others. And I don't see how I can serve effectively if I'm not thinking about my own needs as well. And so we have this tension, and we're thinking about this dynamic, and we're going, where should our focus be? Because if my focus is just on me, I'm never going to get to spiritual young adulthood. Can't happen. But if I shift my focus completely on others and not on myself, then I'm going to end up burned out, bitter, and resentful. And so what should my aim be? And we begin to realize that this thing is not a switch, it's more of a gradient. That we start life on the left side, very inward focused, if not completely. But as we mature, as we embrace spiritual young adulthood, this needle has to start ticking over toward the right. That we have to begin to not neglect our humanity and our needs, but to consider the needs of others and the importance of them. That we have to also realize that at different phases, God grows us in different ways. And one of the big ways that he triggers growth in us in the spiritual young adult phase is through serving. That's a big part of how we learn. Serving through both our financial resources and also our time and talents, right? Like financial resources is a big part of maturing in this phase because it forces us to think about them not as stuff that we earn, but as things that we steward on God's behalf. When we become generous people, there's a switch there, right? It helps us to think about things that truly matter for eternity. It helps us to trust God that he's going to take care of us because we're giving away some of our ability to take care of ourselves. There's a whole lot in that, right? And on the other hand, serving with your time and your talents, volunteering in ministry, it helps meet a big need in the church and in the community. Here, we've said it before, but it takes 185 volunteers to put on worship and next gen ministries each weekend. 185, right? And so there's a big need for you to get engaged. But also serving isn't just to meet that need, it's to help develop our hearts and give us more deeper and fulfilling friendships and relationships that we serve alongside of and the people that we serve together. It's a huge incubator for relationships. Show me people that serve, and as a group, as a whole, I will show you a group that is not very lonely. A group of people that is creating friendships, memories, that are engaging in deepening the relationships that they have begun in this place, right? Through working shoulder to shoulder together. They're using service, they're honoring God with that, but they're pushing past it into a next phase of spiritual maturity. A lot of you guys are serving. A lot of you are part of the over 400 people that serve on our weekend teams. You know the joy and the personal growth and the relationship that comes through serving and how it drives away loneliness, and I celebrate that with you. And also, it puts us on the path eventually, there's no rush to it, but looking forward to think about the next barrier and where God might lead us. And it requires an extension of the inward-outward dynamic. We have to begin to keep moving that needle further to the right to think more of the needs of others. But it also requires a shift. This last barrier does in focus from not just meeting the needs of others, but thinking about investing in others and their personal growth through mentoring. Mentoring is a huge part of our following Jesus and his word for us, but also our personal growth in this phase of our lives. Just think about in John 15, what Jesus says to his disciples. And this is mind-blowing, guys. Like, I read this passage and there's like 2 or 3 things that just jump out at me. But think about this. Jesus says, my command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command: love each other. This is mind-blowing to me that like God would call us friends, but that he would raise up his disciples so that they're not just his minions, they're not just his worker bees, but in addition to doing great work, that Jesus intends for his disciples, for you and me to know the master's business, that we would become what he is about, that we would do the same thing for others that he has done for us. Replication, mentoring, it's a huge part of the growth journey of maturing in our faith. And in fact, I had a mentor at one time who would often reinforce it with a little statement he would make. And I've used this once before, so let's see if you caught it the first time I used it a couple months back. But he would often say this. He would say, apple trees make apple trees. Apple trees do make apples, but it is for the point of replicating the tree. In order to make apple trees that in turn would make fruit and replicate themselves, right? At every part of in every part of the church, I think God desires for us to think about replication. That if we're someone who knows how to teach, that we teach others how to teach. If we know what God has done for us, that we're sharing that with others, that they may know what God has done for us. If we have a technical skill or ability that helps in the mission of the church, that we're passing that along to others. That pastors are raising up pastors and churches are planting churches. That this is how the Christian church has exponentially grown to become a worldwide movement, is each member, each person taking seriously the call of Jesus to replicate. Jesus, he modeled mentoring in so many ways, but it's clear that he mentored through doing what we now call the mentorship square or the leadership square. We would see this a lot in Scripture as you read, that there would be a lot of times where he would do and his disciples would just watch. And then he would say, okay, I'm going to do it, but I want you to help this time. And so he'd have them passing things out or doing whatever else, right? And then he would go, okay, this time I want you to do it, and I will help you. And then eventually, you are going to do this yourself. I'm just going to watch you, right? Jesus modeled this in his mentoring process with his disciples. You can see it in some of the texts that we have read today. And in the leadership square, we see God's heart for mentoring and replication coming out. It's an important strategic part of a growing organization, but it's more than that. Mentoring is the final barrier to a higher level, to the expert level of personal growth, because it also does something in us. We've all seen this popular quote, if you want to learn something, read about it. If you want to understand something, write about it. If you want to master something, teach it. There's something about teaching, right, that forces us to wrestle with things on a deeper level. There's something about mentoring that forces us to process the content in a different way from the perspective of experience and to savor it once again and perhaps even more deeply. It helps us to master things, but more than that, it also invites us to master the heart of God, which is to love others as he has loved us. Because in investing in others, in order for us to do that, it forces us to love others, to care about their growth trajectory. It forces us in our hearts to go, I really care about this person. God thinks they're valuable. He created them in his image, and so I should love them too. And that does a big work in us, right? When Jesus is calling us to love others and we're processing through that, that does a work in us. It begins to push selfishness away. It begins to move the needle even further to the right. That's a huge growth thing for us. And when I think about the people whose journeys I've been blessed to, play a part in over the years, it brings me great joy to know that, God did all the work. He gave them natural ability and he gave them his spirit, and even he worked through me, so I can't even really take the credit for my part, but I got to be a part of their journey. And coaching people has helped me to grow and experience more of God's love for myself. And when I think about the people that I've been able to touch, and I see the updates from them on social media or whatever else, it just brings joy to my face knowing that they're winning at a higher level, and that had something to do with it. There's a bond there, a connection there that will always make me feel less lonely because of the relationship we had. Maybe you can think of similar circumstances when you've been able to bless others. But all along the way, what threatened to rob me of that experience of investing in others was likely the same objection that you're hearing now, or that you might often feel when you think, oh, maybe I could help that person or mentor them or teach them something. And the objection is, what do I really have to offer? Because we think maybe I could bless them in some way, but then we go, what do I have to offer that somebody else doesn't do better? You know, someone else is more of an expert at. What do I have to offer that they can't go on YouTube and watch a video and get content that is 10 times better than what I could give them? And so we disqualify ourselves from this journey. And I think if anything, to speak into that, the example of Jesus is profound, right? That if the incarnation of Jesus has taught us anything, it's that flesh and blood matters. Presence in people's lives, it matters. And that people don't need us to be Jesus to them, because guess what? They got Jesus to be Jesus to them, right? People don't need perfection. I've had to learn this, that people just need someone who is one step further along in their journey to walk through it with them, who has been through that phase, been through that transition, and can help them process and give them perspective along the way. I mean, just think about parenting, literal parenting of kids, where you're thrown into mentoring, whether you like it or not. You know, for those that have become parents, like, did you feel ready for that moment? I mean, maybe you felt like, okay, this is the right phase of life, and like this feels right. But when you're taking that kid home from the hospital, like, did you feel like, I'm ready in this moment? Yes? No? Yeah, like I don't think I've ever met anyone who said yes, like to that. I think people are recognizing that moment, like, what have I done? You know, you're like, I'm in over my head here. Like, I'm not sure what I'm gonna do with this tiny human and how I'm gonna take care of this person. And I think we have this realization, like, I'm gonna have to learn, I'm gonna have to grow a lot to take care of this person and give them the nurture that they need. But what if we normalized that? You know, what if that feeling of being in over your head a little bit, that's a good thing. And it's a key part of growing, to become curious once again, and to realize that you have more to learn, and to begin to look at things from a fresh perspective, the perspective of experience as you go through them, but with a different role this time. And what if we normalize that with mentoring? Realizing that you'll find out what you have to offer people as you figure it out along the way. And you will figure it out. It's just like a good video game. It may get more challenging. There may be different barriers as it goes, but you'll figure it out. And it'll be a blessing to you and to the other. There is a level you'll never get to. There's a fruit you will never taste. There is a relational fulfillment that you will never feel if you don't invest in others. But just because parenthood is at the top of our chart here, I want to clear up a misunderstanding, but before it goes too far down our neural pathways, because we're tempted to think that the ultimate goal then is just to be the mentor, right? To get to a spot where we don't need any further growth, to get to a spot where we don't have any loneliness at all, and we're just kind of super Christians, right? And I'm so glad I can help the little people now. And that we'll be in this phase, right? And we can hear maybe in this message, you know what, you should just be unhappy with where you're at and skip to mentoring as quickly as you possibly can. But no, like that, the truth couldn't be further from that. That's not even close, right? The goal of a Christian is never to short circuit the growth process, never to be like beating up on yourself over where you're at. God's using you in your journey. It's never to graduate from connection or service when you get further along. You always still need those things. And it's never to become totally self-sufficient. The goal of a Christian is not to become self-sufficient. That's not what knowing the master's business, that's not what John 15 or the expert level is all about. The true expert level of a life less lonely, the key posture of someone who will ultimately find the velocity and the strength to push through every barrier is actually given to us by Jesus, and we read about it just a few verses before our John 15 passage, where Jesus says, "Remain in me, as I also remain in you." No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. The expert level is realizing that we never become the roots of our own journey of spirituality or of relational connection, but recognizing that the fruit and any replication that comes from it is always found in staying connected to Jesus. Because it is Jesus who initiates the rest. It is Jesus who calls us into connection as a church community. It's Jesus who gives you gifts in order to use them in service to others. It is Jesus who helps us to find new pathways of growth through mentoring and investing in others, no matter how that looks like, no matter how formal or informal. That it is Jesus who grows us. It is Jesus who brings the fruit out in us. And so when you figure out, as you think about in this message, what phase I am in, and in your heart, in your mind, you can see Jesus pointing to that next barrier and saying, "Follow me." Say yes. Take action to really connect or to serve or to begin to invest in others. And know that life gets far richer, a lot less lonely, and more whole when we do. God, we thank you in this space and place that we can encounter your word and that it can do a work in us. God, we thank you that you sent Jesus that we might encounter your love, that the spiritual infant that you created in us and in our hearts, Lord, you have loved with a passion ever since that moment, no matter how long ago or how recent, Lord, you care about us deeply. You desire for us to be at peace, knowing that you love us, and yet also to know that you have so much in store for us through growing. God, we pray that you would help us to reflect on these words over this next week, that you would help us not to be content with loneliness or too anxious to take the next step or too scared. But Lord, help us know you're right there with us, and we can take the next step knowing that you'll always be with us. Amen.
Thank you for joining us and being a part of our online Pathfinder community. If you're new, you can find helpful links to resources in the description below or at pathfinderstl.org. And if you would like to join us in prayer over the next 40 days of ministry, you can download the Pathfinder app and get daily prayer prompts there. You can also find our message podcasts, which allow you to listen to the weekend message on the go. So whether you're out enjoying this beautiful fall weather, taking a drive, or whatever you're doing, you'll never miss out on an impactful message. If this service was a blessing to you, spread the news and bless others. Hit that subscribe button, like, and comment. Help us in spreading the whole life that Jesus offers with others. Also, if you'd like to support our ministry with a gift, please do so at pathfinderstl.org/giving. It's your generosity that fuels our work here at Pathfinder. Blessings to you this week, and we'll see you next time.